welcome to another video by Bomber on how to install your Bomber boilerplate on your snowboard. We're not going to talk too much about the theory of where the plate should be positioned on the board or your bindings positioned on the plate. We're just going to kind of hit the highlights as far as mechanically attaching the plate to your snowboard. First of all, you're going to get your boilerplate, and it could be one of three models: the 5mm, the 4mm, and the 4mm light. Today we happen to have a 4mm light here. You can tell it's got the real narrow waist. Alright, now also the other option you have when you purchase a boilerplate is if it's UPM mount or 4-hole mount. This plate happens to have the 4-hole mount installed on it, but you can also get the UPM version of the mounts when you order the binding. And that basically is a difference on the snowboard. We happen to have a board here that has both insert capacities on it. We have a 4-hole mount system, and we have the UPM, which stands for Universal Plate Mount System, inserts on the outside. There are some technical differences we won't get into right now, but they do require different hardware, but the installation is the same. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the lower assemblies off the boilerplate. And that's simple to do. You do not have to remove these upper screws here. A lot of people, when they go to install or move their boilerplate, they disassemble the whole thing. Well, you don't have to. Alright, all you have to do is remove these side screws. Okay, and as you noticed, I'm using the handy dandy 5mm hex key here. Everything on the binding is 5mm. Once you remove those, take that same hex key, insert it in there, and that pushes the axle out. Okay, so we got our one here. Do the same here. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, we're going to work with, is positioning these lower brackets on the snowboard. Now, if you'll notice, I know you can't really tell in this shot, but this is the front of the snowboard on my left. So when it comes to the lower assemblies, we want the one that slides, we want that one on the front of the board. The one that is fixed, we want that on the rear of the board. You can certainly try it the other way around, but this seems to be kind of the standard that everyone runs, and there's some various mechanical reasons for that. Once again, we won't get into right now. So what you want to do on the 4-hole is also figure out where you want to position it on the board, also relative to your axle position. All right, if you look at this board, right, or this plate, you'll notice we have what we call the side bosses in the middle position. There is also an inner position and an outer position with these other sets of holes. All right, and once again, that's some theory on what works for you that we will probably get into in another video. Right now I've got both the side bosses in the middle position. Okay, so what I know from that is when I grab the Wonder Bar, which is an optional tool that helps you install the boilerplate, it's not necessary, but it certainly makes it a lot easier, is I'm going to use these center 2 pins. Alright, and those pins go into the 2 holes in the lower assembly. You'll see 2 holes there, and you'll see 2 holes there. So what I do is, I take those 2 pins, line them up in those 2 holes. I do the same here. Alright, so now, the whole assembly moves like this. It is in alignment. No matter what I do, these will be in alignment. So at this point, I can look down and see what set of holes become available to me. In this case, we're going to go with this set of holes. And once again, where this positions on the board has some theory to it that we're not going to get into right now. But anyways, I'm going to line up a set of holes here and a set of holes here. Make sure that Wonder Bar is inserted in the holes. I'm now going to take our mounting screws, all right, with the countersunk washer, and I'm going to install all of them, but not tighten them down. I'm just going to put them in so they're about half a turn from being tight. Okay, once you have all those screws in there loose, not tight, they're about a half a turn or a turn away from being tight, you'll notice the assembly wobbles. I can actually fine-tune the position also because there's slots in the lower assembly. But get it to a spot where it's floating. What I like to do then is just push down on the center of the Wonder Bar, take my 5mm, and I tighten down just 2 of the screws. I tighten down an opposing 2. Alright, and just snug them. You don't have to crank them right now. At that point, it's not going anywhere. I cannot move it. I can now remove the Wonder Bar, and these are perfectly aligned. So what I'll do now is I'll go back, finish tightening all the screws. Alright, those lower assemblies are perfectly aligned. What I'll now do is I'll take the front one with the sliding bearings. I'm going to move those bearings all the way back, get it set up. Alright, so now I can take my plate, and what I'm actually going to do is just make sure it goes on there with a little resistance. That means everything's lined up. I'm going to take my axles, and what I like to do is start with the floating side. Alright, so I take the axle, and what I will do is I'll visually go down, and I'll just look and get those holes close to lined up. Okay, put it all the way in. At this point I'll do the same thing on the fixed side. I'll go down. Now if it's not lined up, I can move the plate back and forth because right now it's on the sliding bearings. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that plate back and forth until I see it pretty darn close. Put it in. If there's a little resistance, take your 5mm key, put it on that axle, push it in. Alright, that is now installed. What you need to make sure is you put the axle lock screws back in. Alright, and snug. There you go. That plate is now installed. What we're going to do now is we're going to backtrack a bit, and I'm going to show you if you want to move those, how to move those side bosses to different positions. I'm going to show you how to do that next. So now, if we wanted to move these side bosses to a different position, like I said, there's 3 positions, an inner, a middle, and an outer. It's pretty simple to do. Alright, obviously you want to take your 5mm key and remove all 4 of these screws. Okay, now with the side bosses removed, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to put them on the outer position. So, as simple as that, I'm now going to I can leave these on the ground, and I'm going to position the plate and reinstall the screws with the side boss on the outer position. Okay, those are installed. Now if you notice, they are not tight. These side bosses wiggle, alright? They have some play in them. Because we need to make sure these are aligned, the hole down the center here, they're concentric with each other. So what I'm going to do now is take one of my axles, insert it in. Okay, it stops, alright? At that point, what I recommend is I would take your hand and hold it like this so that you're tensioning the side bosses to one side. You could do it the other way if you wanted. And then at that point, now tighten those 4 screws. Okay, what I like to do is make them snug. Alright, don't crank them down yet, and double check. Sure enough, no interference. That is a perfect fit. If it wasn't, I would try it again, or try maybe pushing the axle the other way. But anyways, the point is, this is what we want. We don't want any interference. We don't have to force that axle in. If you grab a hammer, try to drive that axle in, I will hunt you down, I'll find out where you live, and I will void your warranty. So, should have no resistance. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead, crank them down, because I know it's lined up, and then remove the axle, and then I go ahead and install it on the board as we just showed you earlier. Okay, now we're going to just briefly show you the UPM version. Alright, everything's actually the same. Except on the UPM version, make sure that you have where it says here center with an arrow. That means the center of the board. So on this one, once again, the fixed bearing goes in back, the sliding bearing goes in front, and it tells you which way it needs to point to the middle. You can use the Wonder Bar. It will work with the Wonder Bar. However, in this case, we're going to kind of just briefly hit on doing the non-Wonder Bar method. So what you do is get it close, all right? You need to get it close to where you want them and install the screws. Okay, in this case I'm only going to install 2 screws on each side just for to keep us rolling here on the video. So as you'll notice, these have some play in them, all right, a little bit of movement. If you run a 4-hole setup, there'd be a lot more play. What I suggest you do is you use the boilerplate as an alignment tool, look at it, especially for the 4-hole version, and just get it close. Now at this point, what I would do is, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is tighten down these screws just a little bit so that the plate will still move, but with a little bit of friction, all right? It won't move without a little bit of effort. So if I do that on both of these, okay, still able to move, but it takes a little bit of effort to get it to move. Okay, now I'll take my boilerplate and I'll do the same thing. Make sure the bearings are all the way back on this one. And I'm going to install the moving bearing side first. So I'm going to visually look, get that lined up, insert it. I'm going to go to the back here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get it visually close. All right, there you go. All the way in. Once again, if it's a little sticky, use the wrench. Now, at this point, the plate is acting as the alignment jig. All right, so those blowers are in alignment. However, they're not tight. So what we have to do is now gently remove each of the axles, trying not to move the assemblies. Gently remove the boiler plate. Now, what I suggest is hold it down and snug those. Snug those screws. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down. Once again, if I had 4, I'd be tightening all 4. Alright, and if we did our job, fingers crossed, bearings all the way back, I'm going to install the plate. I'm going to install that front axle first. I always find that's the easiest way to do it. And now, fingers crossed, we're going to install the rear one. And sure enough, that worked great. All right, that's perfectly aligned. I would then, of course, install the axle lock screws to hold those in there. Okay, one thing you need to check for, if you're not using the Wonder Bar, you have to make sure that those bearings on the sliding side are all the way back. And you have 2 visual ways to check that. If you look on the UPM version, there's a little dot right there when I look down. Okay, and that dot should be in line with the axle. Alright, if it's not, you do not have the front bracket in the right spot. Worst case scenario is you'd have this bracket too far back. That sliding bearing would be bottomed out all the way forward, and you would have a plate that is not floating anymore. That would be bad. So make sure that that axle is lined up with that dot. On the 4-hole version, similar, you'll see 2 dots on either side of the bearing. All right, make sure that that bearing, sliding bearing, is lined up between those 2 dots. The bad place this bearing would be here. All right. That means there's no more travel left in the system. The board will not ride well. This is not the design of the boilerplate. It must float. So the bearing has to be lined up between those 2 dots. Alright, you also have one one thing we want to mention is when you're putting your bindings on here and you're putting your trench diggers on here, this is the normal trench digger lower assembly. Okay, it's got the big E-ring and the large cant disc. It's a little redundant, right? This suspension and this lift you do not need. You have all that in the boilerplate. So what we suggest is convert over to the BP cant system. It's the same functionally. It's the same. You got 0, 3, and 6. You have a E-ring on here, but it's much lower and it's much lighter. All right, doesn't take up as much room and height and weight as the standard one. So that's it today on installing our boilerplate. Like I said, we're going to probably make another video here soon talking about the theory of where to place the boilerplate relative to the board and the bindings relative to the boilerplate. Thanks a lot, and if you have any more questions, just contact us at bomberonline.com.